I'm Bill Borden. I'm the Corporate Vice President of Worldwide Financial Services here at Microsoft. I'm excited to have you join me for this next episode of my series, The Borden Line. For those of you just tuning in, my goal for this series is to open up a line of conversation with thought leaders and innovators to discuss the latest trends, hot topics, insights, and solutions across the financial services industry. And I can't think of a better guest to join me to discuss these key issues than Ather Williams at Wells Fargo Bank. Ather is head of strategy, digital, innovation, and enterprise payments at Wells Fargo, and he spent the last 30 years as a change agent focused on transforming financial services, leading to his current role. Look, I've had the pleasure of working with Ather across a few organizations, and I'm excited to see him in this role at Wells Fargo. So, Ather, welcome to the show, and let's get started.
Thanks, Bill. It's good to be here. You didn't have to mention 30 years. That just make me feel old.
Yeah, that's 30 years is the new 10 years. You know how that
Yeah.
goes, right? So hey, look, I always poke at you a little bit. You've got a really long title because you do a lot of important things at Wells Fargo, and Wells Fargo does a lot of important things, obviously, for the industry. So I want to start with the beginning of that title, head of strategy, right? I think about how critical that is to actually determine, where you want to focus and where you have to make bets and decisions right around the innovation areas you want to focus on. But that depends on understanding, right, the customer and the needs and the expectations and kind of looking around the corner around what things could be out there that customers and businesses are going to demand. So we'd love to start there to get your perspective on kind of how you look at strategy and what that means and how that's predicated and foundationally understanding, right, the market and customers and what they look for. So let's start there.
Okay. Yeah. So Bill, it's strategy is an interesting thing at a large organization like Wells Fargo, right? So we have customers in all parts of the world, and we cover everything from your person just getting their first job and their first bank account, all the way up to the largest corporations in the world, like Microsoft. And so we've got a very wide range of customers. That's kind of one dimension. The other dimension is we have a certain set of capabilities and assets that have been built up over time, things that we do for customers, whether it's advice, it's moving money, it's lending, it's risk management, there's, cross-border payments, there's all kinds of things that we do for customers. And those things are changing over time as customers' needs change. And then you have what I'll call the existential threats, so the outside influences that are happening. Those can be regulatory driven, they can be competitive driven, they can be driven by new technologies. And so the way my role comes here for strategy is, how do I help the leadership team across the business lines and all the functions bring that all together into a coherent plan of how we're going to respond to the changing needs of our customers as we see these existential threats coming in, and then looking at our core capabilities and saying, how do those need to evolve to enable us to serve those customers. But it's also our stakeholders. So think about it. We've got customers, we've got regulators, we've got shareholders, and we have communities in which we work and live. And all those have to be kind of served by Wells Fargo, which is sort of our unique thing. So it's blending those things together.
Yeah, and are there any um, trends or pain points that you're hearing from your customers and clients and businesses that they're really pushing you on the hardest?
Yeah. So I would say that, candidly, the one that we've been focused on many. The regulatory environment has been a journey for banks, between capital rules and other data sharing, other things over time. The events of the election this week obviously threw a few of those things up in the air. So we're sort of putting those on hold, and we'll wait and see how we have to work the new administration on what the rules are for banking going forward. But outside of that, there's been some core things that have been happening over time that we really sort of been watching. So I think about, like, where I spend a lot of time in payments. So if you look at, non-banks share of payments, particularly like B2B payments, have grown tremendously over the last few years. So you think about, like, in 2014, non-banks had like 5% share. Now that's up to almost 20 share of, interdicting payments between businesses. And when you think about what's going on overall in payment revenues have doubled in the last, since the last 20 years. And bank share of those revenues have dropped almost by double digits, like 8, 10%. Our share has fallen. So you just see the growth of non-banks in payments. And so that's a place that we have to sort of think about, why is that and how do we respond? Lending on the other side of that balance sheet is also happening. So we all hear all the noise and see the headlines about private credit, right? And that's a
Mm,
big topic these days, right? But
mhm,
private credit in 2014 was like 18% of the middle market lending base. Now it's up to 40. And so we'll see what happens in this new rate cycle, but that's something you have to think about is that if your customers in the commercial bank are able to find credit or capital from non-traditional sources, that's a major anchor product for us. So how do you cement that relationship? Is it transaction banking? Is it advisory? Is it wealth management? How do you stay relevant to them at those times? And there's good and bad sets. So how do we respond to that? Those are sort of like some existential things. And then also I think you see it from your lens of Microsoft too. Companies are going much more vertical.
mm,
Right. So it used to be you had a generic set of products that could cover all industries. Now the needs for an industrials company are very different than an agriculture company, very different than something in the food service, and depending where you are in the chain, that's different versus healthcare, whether you're a provider or an insurer or a payer, that's all very different. So those verticals are becoming more and more important. So being very specialized, not only in the advice but also the products, and our risk tolerances across those things are all driving some changes. Then if you
mm,
flip to the consumer side of the bank, you get to things like we're at this very unique point in time where you have everyone who are clients of ours from the silent generation, so those born like my parents who are in their early 80s, to my kids who are in their in their young adult years, and so like that's a very wide range of people who have very different views of money, borrowing, investing, and how they want to interact with their money. You still have people visiting the branches every day, but then we get 10 times the amount of usage through mobile and digital that we do anywhere else. And so that's changing it. And then also there's this phenomenon that we think about in terms of wealth transfer. So that silent generation is going to be, you know, passing away and leaving money to the younger generation, millennials and Gen Z, and that's gonna dramatically change not only who and how they interact with their money. So digital becomes more prominent. Also, those Gen Zs and millennials are now are in the workforce and becoming an increasing percentage, and how they want to work is different. So it changes how we have to think about who we hire, the tools we provide them, and kind of what our clients, who are companies. The CFO, 20 years ago is going to be different than the CFO 20 years from now. So how do we think about all those dynamics? So that creates quite a focus on sort of the parts of my job around digital and how we think about interacting. And then the other thing I would say that's a big trend that I know we definitely, you and I spend time talking about, is what generative AI has done or could do to industries. And fundamentally, I think about it, there's like a couple things. One is it's changing how people interact with technology.
mm.
Like even where it is today, this from things you offer through GitHub Copilot, etc. I don't necessarily need to code. I can ask the machine, here's what I want it to do, and it'll code it for me. So that changes a whole bunch of things. I can now interact through an agent or a chatbot and not have to go through a linear path through an app and do exactly what I want it to do and have it executed on my behalf. Fundamentally change how people deal with technology. So we have to think about what, the mobile app, replaced a lot of interactions. What are agents or Gen AI going to do in the future? And how does that change how we have to think about everything from our tech stack to risk to connecting those channels in physical and digital? All that's sort of up in the air and changing. So there's a lot to think about.
Yeah, amazing summary around the segments you're going after, and the many segments that you're after, the types of business that you're in. The verticalization is really an interesting piece, right? As you think about it, we think about that a lot, obviously, at Microsoft in terms of our technologies and how they can be actually specific to the verticals that we're serving. How do you bring that together and then think about it collectively for different businesses that have different strategies that they have to deliver on, but have a common set of technologies, and a common approach, so that you're not building 1,000 points of light all over the organization as you think about digital? Because digital digital we kind of think about digitizing a channel, and you might think about the app on the phone, but digital is everything, right? You're when you think about digitizing, you're thinking about
Yeah.
digitizing everything, every aspect of your company, the organization, how that extends into what your customers and businesses experience in all of your channels. So talk about what digital means to you and how you're looking at trying to express that in Wells as your strategies are rolling out.
Yeah, and I'd say that it's a great question, Bill, because I think we have to think about it from a couple angles. One is On the consumer side, we often look at the best experience you can have. So think about some of your top end um, e-commerce companies and what that looks like. A one-click shopping experience is very different than, oh, I want to apply for a mortgage and how it was before, and it's 1,000 clicks, to be a bit
Mm.
flamboyant about it. But it's just a very different experience. So how do you get that down? And how do you think about that? So we spend time looking at what best of breed is, which often outside of our industry sets the expectations. If it's like that there, why is it like this here? Why does it take more than one click or two clicks to open an account or send money?
Hmm.
There's security reasons, other things, but how do we think about those best experiences? And then we translate it into, all right, when we really dig into the data and look at what our customers are doing with us, whether it be in digital or physically in an office with an individual, how can that journey be simplified and changed? There's a lot of research that goes into what people are doing, and then actually doing ethnographic research and talking to people and say how they actually live their financial lives, and then engineering experience around that. And to your point, it's not just the front end. Then you have to go through the entire tech stack and then into the back end of operations and say, how do we now make that a consistent experience? Because I can't have digital works in 3 clicks, but then it gets into some system and it's not real time or it doesn't have the information. So you have to really think about it front to back, which is very different from how banks have grown up before. Banks were oftentimes very compartmentalized, DDA over here, credit cards over there, mortgages over here, autos over here. They don't talk to each other. No one thinks about the relationship. No one thinks about people need all those things at the same time. And so, how do you bring that together in a coherent experience in digital? Is really a team very focused on that. And then we have a team within that team thinking about now that next generation of experience. We call it Fargo, but how does
Hmm.
that Gen AI based chatbot, chat agent overlay onto that experience and then translate as well?
Yeah, and that's a great way of describing, right, what digitization means and how you're thinking about it with your technology and your business partners together. You're in the middle of that.
Yeah.
You've got to be kind of the glue between tech and business as you pull all that together. And I want to pivot a little bit to Gen AI because you mentioned it, but
Yep.
I also want to get your thoughts about this, right? Because you can get um, you can get really tied into what's the latest and greatest tech, and the tech is changing rapidly. So one might be best over here, one might be best over there. So that's one element of it. But want to get your thoughts because you're very close to working with your business leaders,
Hmm.
and you, like many institutions, I'm sure, have come up with thousands of use cases. And so the question becomes, how do you think about prioritizing those use cases? But more importantly, then how do you work with your IT organization to bring, combinations of capabilities and digitization priorities that you have to actually deliver on the use cases? So not being so fascinated with the tech, but being fascinated with the outcome around how you deliver that tech.
Yeah, it's actually, again, I think it's a good insight, Bill, because the first challenge is candidly educating the experts who are closest to the problem you're trying to solve on the potential of the technology. So, how do you get the right use cases that have the most impact for the customer or for the company, or ideally both? And then you have to then pull, you have to pull the string all the way back through the data and then into the back office systems to say, all right, what's ready? And then you have
Mm-hmm.
to do a wrapper around it, around risk, around data
Hmm.
compliance and security and PCI compliance, all those things you have to wrap around it to make sure it works. That's kind of point one. Then you have like the whole infrastructure model selection debate because there's always new models, and we're at a point now. I think you all know this, given your investments in OpenAI and other places. But the models are so tremendously expensive to train, and they're so good that all right, how do we pick the right model, work with it, and then also how do we think about picking either a big large language model, like a GPT-4, or you're thinking about a very specialized model because it's a very specialized use case. So
Hmm.
that's kind of part of it. And then to your point, we've built internally sort of a platform so we can hone our own experience. We can take that large model, run our data through it, and actually hone it to what it needs to know around our product names, our nomenclature, our risk environment. Um, and then we've also been thinking about it as, all right, it's not one use case. It needs to be built on a path. So you can have, to your point, you can have 100 different ideas about different chatbots around the company, but you don't want to have 100 different versions of that. So
Hmm.
you need a platform that can say, okay, how do I search internal data? How to use things like Copilot, search internal data, bring it to the surface, and then you could maybe put another layer on top of it to specialize it for what happens in a branch versus what happens in a contact center versus a banker is about to walk into a client. But fundamentally, those things kind of do the same stuff when you get down further in the layer. It's maybe that last mile, if you will, that has to be different. So we were thinking about how do we build use cases that scale across, infrastructure that scales across multiple use cases is really how we're thinking about it, which takes a little bit more time, but we think it'll have more impact longer term. And then if you're to change stuff out, you just change it out once in the back. If there's a new version of a model comes out, you can fit the model in once it's trained and go, and you don't have to think about changing it in 1,000 places.
Hmm. Hmm. And you've talked a lot about obviously change management is a big thing within the institution as you think about prioritizing and delivering strategies going forward for the business. Um, you've lived through that in a few large organizations, financial institution
Yeah.
organizations, but I'd be curious to hear your thoughts about driving change in large financial institutions that have to manage risk, have to manage compliance, have to manage a lot of different functional areas, a lot of different businesses and technology organizations. Just a couple of comments around there's a strategy and you coming up with the great ideas, but there's also the strategy based on the culture you're in at the bank to actually how do you actually make something happen with it. So just you've had some success. I'd love for you to talk about how you've broken through on that.
Yeah. Wow. So change management is like it's anything and everything. And I'd say that it can be the differentiator for a company if you get it right. And so we've been very focused on one understanding that most people don't like change. I'm one of the weird ones who actually thrive on it. Like if things get too stale, I get bored. So I love change, and so I sort of embrace it. And I have to realize that most people on my teams or in the organization, particularly the risk organization, don't.
Hmm.
So one is you got to bring everybody you got to bring everybody along that journey um, from the beginning. And so like I think about the best example I can say is when we were launching Fargo. The team would tell you that there were risk teams in every business, legal teams in every business, compliance teams in every business, all who wanted to, be on the journey, which was good. However, you can't have 160 people trying to, you know, create a new thing. It just never move fast enough. So we had to sort of like, all right, we're gonna deputize people across all the functions to be involved to speak on your behalf. We'll have one lawyer, one risk person, one compliance person be part of the Scrum team and teams who are developing this thing early on. Preempt. These are the questions you're gonna have to answer and things we want to understand, the risks we're concerned about, and have the team do that up front versus or a lot of cases like we would do in a prior, decades prior in our careers where you build something and you bring it to compliance and they're like, well, this is wrong, that's wrong, this wrong, and dismantle it and try to rebuild it. We're like, no, no, you're guys to get up front and you're gonna be on this journey with us. And when we have real time issues, you have to weigh in on the solution, not just be like, no. And getting people to switch to the how do we get to yes mentality was a huge part of the change management process to get things out the door quickly.
Hmm.
And also helping people understand that speed is not a bad thing. Like, and I think about this in the concept of banking, and we and I've worked on payments for a while. Latency in payments, all people always view as a good thing because you have time for issues, you have times for recalls, you have time for fraud checks. So latency good. In delivering experience in technology, latency bad, very very bad. So how can you get from months to days or weeks? You've got to get everybody up front and along, and then get everyone in a mindset to how do we get to yes, or if it's going to be a hard no, quickly,
Hmm.
and then
Yeah.
we can pivot to what would work. Those have been sort of the things we've employed to sort of speed, accelerate the ability to innovate.
Yeah, no, that's really awesome perspective and advice, and it does take everybody in the boat to
Yes.
move forward, to hear the same expectations, to hear the same points of view, right? So you don't hear some person's interpretation of what the regulator thinks, and it's like, well, no, this is how we should really get together and do that. And as a partner, because I know part of your strategy too is engaging with strategic partners, technology providers is part of your strategy. And so I want you to comment on that as well. Obviously, Microsoft and our approach to to not just being a technology provider to you, but also being a partner to you to help you think about how you can drive ideation, drive thought process, and then drive ideation to actually things that we can get to roll out and scale. But talk about what partners mean in your strategy.
Yeah, so I think the thing I love about being here at Wells is that we're not candidly arrogant enough to think that we have all the answers. I think we have some things we do extremely well. The bank historically, through all the cycles, has been phenomenal in risk management, particularly around credit risk. I'd say outstanding. We have scale in most of our businesses that we're in. And so those things are core competencies. However, when you think about things like some of the stuff that you and I are working on together between Microsoft and Wells Fargo. So you've done some phenomenal things with dynamics and with how do you leverage those tools and capabilities to help drive your products in those verticals you mentioned earlier, right? So
Hmm.
those sales opportunities. So, we start having those early dialogues about, hey, not only can we leverage your cloud capabilities to allow us to scale stuff quickly, but candidly, what can we learn from what you've done? And then morph that into how do we use that through our CRM infrastructure and dynamics for our bankers and have them work through that same next best recommendation action sort of journey. And so that's what I think what partners can bring to us. You not only brought like some core infrastructure around cloud, but we actually learned like, hey, here's a best practice that we can then take and employ. And then I think is also as we start thinking about verticals, like we're never going to be best in class in every vertical out there. So we're going to have to say, hey, here's where we're going to fit in and what the customer needs. But at the core of it, if we're holding their cash and we're lending them money and we're helping them hedge risk, we're kind of key to this thing. But let's just layer on everything else and let's lock in that group of people to help them really deliver value, which I think is the important thing. So we want to be value added to our customers. So partnerships are key to find like what's best in breed, and we kind of starting to set up our infrastructure so you can have some foundational partners like yourselves, and you can bring in smaller even fintechs and say, hey, we're going to plug you into the environment, and as the customer needs change, we can react quickly. And if they evolve from there, we can unplug and replug, whether it's the large language model or it's a client facing piece of technology. Those things are faster than us trying to build everything ourselves. And then we're sort of stuck in this cycle of we built it, we got to amortize it forever. And we don't want to unplug and move as fast as we need to keep up with the market.
Yeah, no, that's good to hear, and it's good context, and it's good for me to take away too as we continue to think about how we can um, not just be technology providers, but be in the thought process around the strategies and outcomes that you're looking to drive as a business, and we
Yeah.
can actually help you deliver that, and then talk about our technologies and partnerships and other third party relationships that we have that you have as well that we jointly work on together. So that's awesome. So look, it's fascinating because you cover such a spectrum of customers and markets, and you offer such a wide range of products. So you've really got a lot of um, challenges, but opportunities to actually think really broad about how financial services can be good for right the communities in which you serve around the world, and it's really awesome. And so, with that broad prospect and view that you've been working on, it's been awesome. And as we wind down, like, what are the one or two things you want to leave my audience with right around your success and being successful in this world of driving strategy, not just you and I used to joke about this strategery, not just for a strategery thing, but actually turning it into things that translate into business value for your customers and for how you grow Wells.
Yeah. So I think there's probably, there's a couple, probably three things. One is I'm laser focused on my team of being customer centric, but data driven.
Mhm.
So it's great to say, hear from bankers or look at the data of how people are interacting with us through digital or through the teller systems, understand what they're doing. But we've got to really understand what the underlying problem is we're trying to solve. Like, what are we trying to do here? Like, what are they trying to accomplish? And realize that banking is not what they do every day. It's what we do every day, but it's not what they do every day. If you're a small business owner, you want to run your business, you don't want to do banking. If you're a CFO, yeah, you're much more adept at banking, but you're actually trying to grow your business. You're not really trying to think about how to structure the lending product or how to, what's the best way to move money around the world to pay your bills or collect from your clients. Like that's where we should come in. So really being focused on their needs and so how we use data to support it and then building things at scale that can really deliver those. That's sort of like number one. Number two is intellectual curiosity and creating that learning organization. Like I think about, and I have this conversation with my young adult kids, right? And I'm sure you have it with yours. Like we're in a world now where between generative AI and mobile technology, knowledge is commoditized. Like everybody can know anything and have it kind of written in a very eloquent way, like at the tip of your fingers. So that's not no longer the skill. Like when I was going to school, it was all about rote learning and memorization and coming up early. The first 20 years of our career were probably based on not what you knew. Now it's about critical thinking and learning and how quickly you can learn and adapt and then lead people through change, to your question earlier. So that's the next thing is really how do you get into a learning posture across the organization and be very adept at managing change and pivoting when you need to. That's kind of number two. The last thing has really been for us taking a lesson out of the page of some of the great product companies is really becoming a product organization front to back and not really thinking about, oh, the business is here and tech and ops are over here and they're not anywhere. No, no, no. It's all got to be lined up, whether it's the digital front end, it's the product value proposition, risk and reg, and all that, and then how we deliver it through product, through ops, through technology, and the service. All that's got to be lined up and it's got to work seamlessly because that's how the best experiences work everywhere else, whether you're in you're in a Starbucks, or you're buying off Amazon, or we're sourcing a product from Microsoft. I think about how the Microsoft Office suite when I used to have it, it was like four separate apps, and now it's like an integrated system of things, and now you roll Copilot on top of it, and it's like now it can work off the corpus of everything, and so it's evolved in one integrated thing. So that integration and that product transformation is something as a company we've been driving that's going to keep helping us accelerate and become more relevant to our customers.
Oh man, that's awesome perspective and guidance, and it's fun to see it take shape in Wells as you're delivering for the market. And look, I could go on for another hour with you. You know that, Ather. But I'll wrap there, and thank you for that advice, and thank you for joining me and sharing amazing perspective and real world insights and thoughts that I think that people listening can kind of take away and see how that applies to their environment. So really appreciate you taking time to join me today. And thanks to all of you for tuning in to this episode of The Borden Line. I look forward to my next conversation in the series and hope you'll come back and join me. Please keep the input coming on topics you'd like to hear in the future. Thanks again, everyone.